Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to talk to you about is quite seriously the most important issue facing the whole of humanity. It's not the stock market crash, I'm afraid. It's really something much more serious than that. We humans are facing the greatest crisis of our entire million-year existence on this planet. This is the Earth emergency. It's the direct result of compounding threats to the health of both planet and people created by human actions over the last half century or so. There is presently no plan by any nation or international body to tackle the Earth emergency in all its aspects. We urgently need one. Every other issue is a distraction from the mounting danger to our own survival. What we have is a chaotic road to avoidable disaster, driven by 10 vast interconnected threats, which are all the result of human activity. These threats have been carefully documented by science worldwide over more than 60 years. They show that the human capacity to inflict mass harm on ourselves, on our health and our well-being, and that of the planet as a whole, has increased exponentially since the middle of the last century. Collectively, they menace the future of human civilization, and certainly our health and our ability to survive. They are all driven at core by the same four factors: overpopulation, overconsumption, overpollution, and money. The science is in. We've wiped out 3/4 of all large animals in just a few decades. Studies show that extinction rates are now about 1,000 times above the normal levels that apply on Earth generally. Human beings and our livestock now make up 96% of all life on land. We're destroying forests, wetlands, grasslands, and ocean life at rates never before seen, and we are creating new deserts, toxic and uninhabitable regions. The extinction process that's going on now is in actual fact 3 times faster than the process that took out the dinosaurs, believe it or not. Now, so ecological collapse threatens humans as well as wildlife. It's not just about nature. It's really very much about us. We are in effect collapsing the life support system of the Earth, the thing that keeps us going. We're losing fresh water, topsoil, fish, forests, and other vital resources at shocking rates. Human consumption of materials is skyrocketing. It was about 29 billion tonnes a year for the whole of humanity back in the 1970s. Today, it's 120 billion tonnes, heading for 150 by the middle of this century. All those resources come at a huge cost to our own health and well-being because of the damage and pollution that they cause. There is already a world freshwater crisis affecting half the world's population. That is a major health crisis too, and it can only grow more severe. There's a crisis in our farming soils that nobody wants to acknowledge. We're felling forests and clearing land as if there was no tomorrow, which may become the case. And we are killing large parts of the ocean. The ocean's actually losing its oxygen at the moment, as well as a large number of dead zones arising around the place. Now, just to give you a feel for how each one of us affects this, that picture shows the salt lakes in the Andes in Chile. They used to be covered in flamingos. You can see about 2 or 3 flamingos in that picture. The reason that there are no flamingos is that the water has been drained to be used in processing the lithium that powers the battery that runs your phone, your electric vehicle, your chainsaw, whatever it is. So with our indiscriminate use of electrical items alone, we are mining water around the planet and destroying ecosystems like this one, which have been there for millions of years. Soil loss, note down there, we're losing about 45 to 75 billion tonnes of topsoil every year. That's the stuff that grows our food. So that's just going away on the wind and with the rain, and down the rivers and into the oceans, down to the bottom of the ocean where we can never use it again. Forests are being felled at around about 25 million hectares a year. There is some let up in that, and in some places they're putting the forests back, but places like the Amazon are being clear felled like there's no tomorrow. We're wasting over 1 billion tons of food a year. That's just outrageous in this society, especially when there's 800 million people who haven't got enough food. About a third of the fisheries on Earth are completely unsustainable. They're starting to collapse, in other words. So we can't just keep on hauling fish out of the ocean at the rate we've been going. And the bottom line is that humans now overshoot the Earth's resources. We basically use up the renewable resources of the planet Earth in 7 months. For 12 months worth of resources are used up in 7 months. So we're consuming far more of the Earth than it can possibly provide us with in the long run. And these things are going to catch up with us. We're poisoning everyone and everything on the planet every single day, especially our children. They come into a toxic world. In fact, most children are born with already carrying a cargo of carcinogens and toxicants in the embryo, in the womb. And then when they take their first sip of their mother's milk, what do they get? Pesticide. So really we're not thinking about our kids at all. Our society is awash with chemicals. I've calculated that we produce around about 200 billion tons of chemicals from all forms of human activity. That's not just manufacturing, but that's also things like construction, agriculture, mining, and so on. All of these chemicals are let loose. Many of them are toxic, and they are having a huge effect on our health. And that chemical output is going to double by the 2030s, which is not far away. The World Health Organization tells us that around about 14 million people, that is 1 in every 4 human beings, now die as a result of toxicity in their environment. That's in their air, their water, their food, their home, their workplace. I mean, we're just swimming in these things and in the mixtures that they create and doing very little indeed to quell them. I argue that this killing 14 million people a year, which is very much worse than the Holocaust in World War II, is the greatest act of preventable homicide that humans have ever committed. And it's downright time that we did prevent it. Now, can we see the evidence of this? Absolutely. Brain diseases worldwide are now pandemic and out of control. So we've seen things like autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so forth, a whole host of diseases that weren't very common previously in previous generations are now becoming much more common. 1 person in every 8 suffers from a mental condition worldwide now, and the human intelligence has actually declined by 13 points since 1975. So we're losing about 1.5 IQ points every decade at the moment. And it's you can see what's happening in our politics, in our behavior, our social behavior, and the things that are going on around us. We're just not as bright as our parents. This is something that has got to be fixed. Okay, well, we all know about the nuclear situation. According to the Chicago group, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, we are now the closest to nuclear catastrophe that we've ever been since Hiroshima, basically. There's still 12,300 warheads in the world arsenal. That's less than there were in the past. But look, you only need 50 or 100 nukes to start a nuclear winter. And a nuclear winter would take out the food supply. It would kill about 2 billion people. So even a very small, limited, local nuclear war could actually affect every country on Earth by destroying, their food crops, rice, wheat, corn, and so on. 9 nations worldwide now have the capacity to do this to us. And they are developing ever deadlier weapons systems. many of which are powered by AI and over which basically humans are no longer in charge. The AI may decide to launch a nuclear war all on its own. And if you think that that's a fictional scenario, it's not. And there have been over 30 situations in the last 50, 60 years in which we came to the brink of nuclear war because of some technical malfunction in the early warning system and so forth. The world has discarded most of its nuclear treaties, and we're looking at this growing technological dysfunction that's carrying on. Now, 2/3 of nations want nuclear weapons to be banned, but 1/3 of nations want to keep them. That is, 1/3 of the world's countries support nuclear war. Most women want nuclear weapons banned, but most men think they're okay. Why is that, one wonders? Now, as everybody knows, we're shaping a climate that will render the Earth largely uninhabitable within a few generations. Heating emissions are still rising strongly. That's CO2, methane, and all the other greenhouse gases, despite talk about constraining them. Those are going to take us past +2 degrees by 2050. And they're going to take us to 4 degrees by 2100. And I know this doesn't sound much, but take it from me. I've been writing about farming and agriculture for over 50 years. At those levels, farming and agriculture become impossible. So the food supply disappears. At +3 to +4 degrees, it becomes impossible to farm because farming is all taking place, or nearly all taking place, outdoors. So we're moving into a situation where we could collapse the world food supply if we don't look out. Plenty of things we can do about it, but we've got to take on board the warning signs now. Now, our total carbon emissions are around about 42 billion tonnes a year, and they are rising at record rates. So we're on a business as usual strategy, in spite of all the pledges of governments around the world. And we've got to the point where the Earth is now generating its own heat. So all that carbon that was locked up in the tundra, on the seabed, in the tropical swamps that are catching fire now, that's going back up into the atmosphere and heating the planet. And it's not being absorbed by the oceans at anything like the rates it should be any longer. So there's 3 to 5 trillion tonnes of carbon locked up in natural resources, and they are being let loose now by the planet itself as we cook it up. So this is a process that we actually cannot stop. Humans will have no control. If it gets out of hand, there's nothing we can do about it. So we need to stop it happening now. And then we've got technology. Look, there's been a lot of talk about it, but the problem is climate change is the result of a very benign technology, burning coal and oil, that got out of hand because there was just too much of it going on. Agriculture is a very benign technology, but it's cut down all the forests, and it's the main driver of extinction worldwide. So you can see how a very good, promising technology, if it's not properly controlled and supervised, can get out of hand and cause a major threat. Well, that's true of AI, which is not being supervised by anybody at the moment. It's just at the whim of the tech bros. Universal surveillance, that's the spying on every human being at the moment, the technological surveillance that goes on your computer or your iPhone. Man-made plagues. Well, there is a lot of evidence now that COVID started in a laboratory. The scientists are starting to really take this seriously. Why? Because there are 30 experiments going on right now worldwide to try to turn wild viruses into more deadly pathogens of human beings. So we're creating more deadly plagues. Now, I cannot understand why, but there is no ethical oversight of these man-made, of these activities in the lab, which is a disgrace. Nanopollution. You're inhaling tiny particles which are going into your blood, into your brain, into your children, and so forth. Killer robots. We know about killer robots. They make their own minds up about who they kill, and they can get off the hook. And we're putting everybody in megacities. I mean, Don't get me wrong, cities are a great idea, a great invention, but they're terribly fragile because all of their food comes from outside and their water and everything else. No megacity can support itself if it's isolated from its surrounding environment. So megacities themselves are a terrible point of vulnerability for human beings. Now, food. I mentioned before, we currently throw away nearly half our food, and then we wreck the planet trying to grow more. That means half of our farmers are farming their little hearts out to feed nobody, which is disgraceful, because that food is going through to landfill or compost in some cases, but mostly to landfill. So that's a terrible waste. Our agricultural system is a system of terrible waste. Now, the essential things that are controlling it are the fact that there's 110,000 more people going to sit down to dinner tonight than sat down last night. So the human population is still ballooning. It's not just babies being born, it's also old folks like myself living longer lives than we would otherwise normally have lived. It's about rich people who, on the whole, on average, eat 35,000 more meals than do poor people in the course of their lives. It's about meat demand in developing countries soaring to match meat demand in countries like America and Australia. All of this is going to double global demand for food by the middle of this century. But on the other hand, as I mentioned, we're running out of water. 3/4 of the world's water, or 2/3 to 3/4, is used to grow our food. So if we run out of water, we run out of food as well. We've passed peak land. The world agricultural area is actually shrinking now. And of course, we are losing topsoil at these unsustainable rates. So the soils we used to farm very successfully are disappearing under our feet. We're getting limited on the major nutrients like phosphorus and things like that. We've already passed peak fish. The fisheries are starting to contract in the oceans. We're not investing in new agricultural science at anything like the rates we used to do. And of course, climate is rolling down. I mean, agriculture is terribly vulnerable to climate. So all of that is now starting to weigh very heavily on our ability to feed ourselves. And somehow governments keep on ignoring this. They just assume the food will always be there in the supermarket. Well, take it from me, it won't. If agriculture falls over, then governments fall over as well. So really that's the scenario that we're looking at if we don't take a lot of care. I'm going to offer you the solutions to all of these problems later in this talk, just in case you think this is a bit doom and gloom. I'm just giving you the scientific facts at the moment. So food security is the Achilles heel of modern civilization, and governments do not get that. There's an urgent need to completely rethink the way we produce food, because using a Stone Age technology like agriculture is not going to feed a 21st century hot world that's overpopulated. The world population has tripled in my lifetime. Every year we're cramming another 80 million people into lifeboat Earth. And this is driving all of the other threats. This is behind a huge demands on the planet and the rate at which we're ploughing through its resources. However, and this is a very positive sign, human fertility is also declining in most countries. Why? Because women are having or choosing to have fewer babies. And they're making that decision, not men. So women are actually showing us a lead. They have understood that overpopulation is a threat and it's going to hit us sooner or later. And they're trying to reduce the population right now. And if all things being equal, provided everybody can get access to food and access to water and access to healthcare and so forth, the human population can come down quite quickly. So, it's not a one-way street. And we don't need the sort of populations that the billionaire bros talk about. They're just being greedy. If you talk to the scientists and you ask them what is a stable, sustainable human population, most of the science that I have read, the scientists I've spoken to, say around about 2 or 3 billion people, which is what the world population was in the 2050s, sorry, in the 1950s. So if you wind the clock back 75 years, that's basically a stable, sustainable human population at today's levels of consumption. So that just gives you an idea of what the Earth can carry and what it is carrying at the moment, 8.2 going to 10 or 11. It's way overstocked. And if you talk to any farmer about what happens if you put 1,000 cattle in a field that is designed to carry 250 cattle, they all die of starvation very quickly. That's what happens there. And the Earth is going the same way. Okay, well, I've already mentioned pandemic diseases. There have been 7 pandemics since 2000, and there's mounting concern now about an 8th, which is the transfer of avian flu to humans. That could be very deadly because certain versions of avian flu affect the brain and the central nervous system, and they kill chickens real quick, and they kill humans real quick too if they start spreading the same way. So avian flu, if it got loose in humans and was transferable human to human, would be a lot worse than COVID, a lot worse. So we need to be alert and aware about that. We also need to understand that infectious disease is driven by human behavior. And what are the main behaviors that produce a lot of infectious disease? Well, the short answer is overpopulation, destruction of the environment, because most of these new diseases, a lot of the flus, HIV, hantaviruses, Ebola, Marburg, they all come out of the jungle. They're resident in bats or monkeys or something else. They only get into humans when humans cut the jungle down. Megacities. What a megacity is like a bioreactor. It's bringing a huge number of people together in one giant compost heap, and that allows them to spread diseases much more efficiently. Travel. It only takes 24 hours for a new disease to go from one side of the world to the other. So the fact that we're moving 1.5 billion human beings around the planet every year is a hell of a good way to spread infectious disease. So we've really got to start thinking about, does my right to travel include a right to kill other people? Because that's what's happening at the moment. And the other driver I've mentioned, bad science. There's some pretty bad science out there that's tinkering with new viruses in ways that should not be happening. The World Health Organization says, look, if we don't get on top of this problem, new worse plagues are likely. Well, I think that's pretty obvious. They've been happening ever since the Black Death or the measles epidemic back in the 3rd century, or whatever it was that took out the ancient Athenians. You find a bunch of people, a new disease comes in from outside, and they're all vulnerable to it because their immune systems are unprepared for it. Now, the other issue that really is affecting our society in a bad way at the moment is misinformation. We lie constantly and continually to ourselves about all these threats. The scientists publish them in the scientific literature, and then a whole lot of politicians and corporations and people like that just get up and deny it. Why, I've got no idea, but they simply don't care. But mass delusion and disinformation now inundate our societal discourse around the world. This is not just happening in America. It's happening in Britain. It's happening in Australia. It's happening in China. It's everywhere at the moment. Bullshit is being spread, across the internet. There's good stuff on the internet. Don't get me wrong. There's truth and things like that, but there's also an enormous quantity of bullshit, and unfortunately, a less intelligent human race doesn't have the ability to tell the difference. So people swallow this stuff. And in fact, there have now arisen several kinds of media that specialize in telling lies because they've discovered there's a percentage of the populace that enjoys being lied to for whatever reason. They just want to believe these fantasies about society. But let me tell you this, misinformation will destroy government, You cannot have a democracy if nobody knows what is true and what isn't. You know, it will destroy that. It'll probably destroy the economy as well, because again, claims cannot be validated or refuted. So really, this is a very dangerous trend for humans to deceive ourselves, and we need to do something about it. Right, well, the real point I want to make is that these 10 threats, you cannot solve them one at a time because they're all interconnected. They're joined together by the fact that they're driven by overpopulation, by overconsumption, by overpollution, and those things. So if you try to fix one of them, chances are you will end up making other ones worse. So we have to come up with solutions that work across the board. All 10 of these major catastrophic risks have to be solved at the same time. And that means we have to change our behavior. We have to eat differently. We have to house ourselves differently. We have to produce things differently than we have in the past. We can't go on being 19th century or Stone Age humans in a modern world. We have to adapt, as humans are very good at doing. So basically, all of these things have solutions, right? And we need to get on with solving them, because at the moment, our governments are not doing it. But let me make this point. If you want to solve a problem, you first have to understand it. You cannot solve that problem if you do not know how it has arisen. So understanding this issue and understanding the major factors that I have just mentioned is an absolutely critical part, and sharing this understanding with one another and developing solutions. I've written several books about this, but the most recent is How to Fix a Broken Planet. It contains the actual solutions, not only what should be done by governments, but what every one of us can do in our own lives to make this a safer, more habitable world for our children and grandchildren, a healthier world for everybody. In effect, it is the first draft of a world action plan for a healthy, habitable Earth on which we can all dwell way into the future. Now, I'm just going to run through the top 12 solutions. There are hundreds of solutions. Don't get me wrong, this is a very complicated problem, and there's a lot of aspects to it. But I'll just run through the top dozen so you understand that it is fixable. This problem is fixable by well-intentioned, well-informed human beings. First one is an Earth System Treaty. Basically, this is just a legal agreement among everybody that we ought to try to save a habitable planet for our children. I don't think there's anybody, really, any parent who would disagree with that. They don't want their children to die horribly. They want them to enjoy a good life on a pleasant Earth, the same way that we did when we were growing up. Now, treaties are generally signed by nations, okay? And nations have very selfish interests. So I'm suggesting, we're proposing at the Council for the Human Future that everybody on Earth be invited to sign this treaty. We think that every individual should have a right to commit themselves to a habitable Earth, a healthy future for their children. We feel that everybody should have that. I mean, you don't have to sign it if you don't want to. If you don't agree, if you don't think humans should survive, you're not being forced to sign this. But everybody who wants to survive and wants their children to survive should have a right to do it. So having an agreement to do so is really important. If we don't agree on something, globally, it's never going to happen, is it? We are not going to save ourselves if we don't first of all agree to save ourselves. Second thing, well, I've mentioned the ban on nukes. I mean, they're crazy. They will destroy us if we let them. Almost everybody who's an expert in this field says if we got nuclear weapons, sooner or later, some idiot is going to use them. And things can go out of control very, very quickly once people start throwing these things around. And half these nuclear weapons are under control of people who are basically certifiably nuts. So, think about that too. There's not very much control or discipline over the world arsenal at the moment. We already have the treaty to ban these things, but only half the world has signed it, and the other half is just sitting on its hands and thinking, "Oh, nuclear war sounds okay. We'll survive that." Well, you won't. But so first of all, we've got to agree to get rid of these damn things, and big efforts have been made in America, in Russia, and elsewhere to destroy old nuclear weapons. So we know you can do it. But at the moment, it's all come to a grinding halt. Chemical weapons is an example in point. The world was awash with chemical weapons in the 1980s. We've destroyed nearly all of them now. I mean, there are a few floating around still, but basically, the chemical weapons are the proof that you can get rid of these nasties if you really want to. And you can destroy them in ways that don't cause harm or leave toxic waste and things like that. So, but we really need the citizens of the world to speak up on this one, because governments, which are basically male-driven organizations, they think they can get away with nuclear war. And, that's just lunacy. Back in the day, Ronald Reagan and Brezhnev, sorry, not Brezhnev, the other guy, but agreed that nobody's going to win a nuclear war. You have a nuclear war, everybody loses. Everybody around the world, even if the war is localized. So we need people to start speaking up a lot more strongly on this particular issue, because it is one of the 2 or 3 ways that we are most likely to eradicate humans. And not enough is being done about it at the moment. We're just going on in a laissez-faire way. Now, quite simply, if humanity is to survive, we have to get rid of these damn things. There is no intermediate position. Right, ending fossil fuel use. Oh, everybody goes, shock, horror, we can't afford to do that. Well, you can't afford to do it if you don't want to survive. But basically, we keep on burning these things. We know where we're going to end up, +4 to +7 degrees by the early part of next century, without a food supply, without much water. There's the scientific projections suggest that fewer than 1 billion humans would remain alive if we keep on burning fossil fuels at our present rate. Okay, so that's 9 people out of 10 are going to die as a result of the Earth cooking up and losing its food and water. So really, ending fossil fuel use is not a luxury. It's not something that's economically unaffordable. If humans are to survive, we've got to go with renewable energy. It's as simple as that. And renewable energy works. We know that. It's doing a magnificent job. And I do note that China, which is the world leader in this area now, is shedding its fossil fuels quite successfully, and it is far and away ahead of other countries in terms of its implementation of renewable energy. So, I mean, that's where the boom economy is going to be, renewable energy. And as I will describe shortly, renewable food too. So it's in things that you can use over and over and over again, and there is no end to them. So this is, reliant on old fossil fuels and trying to find new ones in the Arctic and stuff is insanity, pure and simple. It will destroy us. So we have to go the other way. One of the bonuses from getting rid of fossil fuels is a huge bonus for human health. It would be the biggest thing that we could do for human health, because nearly all of the diseases that we now suffer from are a result of the toxic poisoning that we're all suffering from, this huge chemical, inundation that's going on in our environment. And the chemicals are mostly made from fossil fuels. So if you get rid of fossil fuels and you replace chemicals and pharmaceuticals with things made from plants or microbes or, by green chemistry even, you can have a much safer, healthier world, and you can get rid of many of the diseases of which people die nowadays. So, and the point is, getting rid of fossil fuels is entirely feasible, completely affordable, and a very practical solution. So let's get on with it, basically. The next one is a circular world economy. I mentioned we produce currently, or we use 120 billion tons of stuff every year. That's timber and rock and metal and chemicals and all sorts of water, all these kinds of things. But what do we do with the waste? We dump it in waste pits in the cities. We throw it down the sewer and it goes out into the oceans. We just chuck it around the landscape and leave festering piles of it. We need an economy now that uses that over and over again. Now, 3,000 years ago, when Homer wrote the Odyssey, they used to put the dung from the animals back onto the fields. They would recycle the nutrients, in other words, to keep the land fertile. So people 3,000 years ago knew about recycling. We know about recycling today. We recycle our drink cans. We recycle our mobile phones, different metals, exotic metals they're made from, out of them and make them into a new mobile phone. So basically, it's doable. It's completely doable. And several industries, the aluminium industry, the mobile phone industry, and so on, are classic examples of how you develop a circular economy, which is one that wastes nothing and consequently doesn't need to produce anything either. So just think about this for a moment. When the human population reaches its peak in around about 2060, because women are cutting back their fertility, basically what's going to happen then is the demand for new metals is going to collapse. All the old metals you will ever need will be available more cheaply in the waste stream. So no one will ever need to dig another mine on planet Earth or on the moon or on an asteroid or anywhere. The idea of mining forever is nuts. And miners haven't really realized this yet, unfortunately, but their accountants are going to point out to them that if you process the waste stream of a big city, you will get more metal out of it than you could ever get out of a mine, and much more cheaply. So, we're going to be doing things like that differently. The point about this, a circular economy, is that it doesn't rely on material goods. It recycles material goods. It relies instead on a resource that is inexhaustible. That is the human mind. It's a creative economy. It's all our ideas pulled together to create wonderful new things, wonderful new devices, wonderful new activities, arts, imagination, science, you name it. It's the creativity of the human mind let loose. And that doesn't use a lot of energy or a lot of stuff. To have great ideas does not require a tremendous amount of material goods. What it does require in the way of material goods can be drawn out of recycling. So a circular economy is of critical importance to countries like the US and Australia and the world. Now, I spoke briefly about renewable, climate-proof food, and this is entirely feasible. How do I know? Because I speak to farmers every day, every week, all around the world, and they are doing it. They are doing it now. And there are three main sources for renewable food. The first one is what we call regenerative agriculture, which is agriculture that does not destroy the environment in which it lives. So it's agriculture that doesn't use a lot of chemicals, doesn't use a lot of machines, basically works in harmony with the environment in which the farm exists. It's still exposed to climate, so it's still vulnerable, but on the whole, it's a much more sustainable way. Unfortunately, most of the research money that is going into agriculture these days is going to big chemical companies and machinery companies and things like that to produce this mechanized system of agriculture which destroys the very things that agriculture needs to survive: soil, water, and a healthy food. But, you know, there are other sources of food. Now, basically in the future, we are going to harvest all the nutrients that flow through our cities. So all the food that comes into a city ends up in the sewage system or somewhere like that. We're going to pull the nutrients out of that, cleanse them, and then reuse them for food again. No nutrients will be wasted. At the moment, most of these things are piped to the bottom of the ocean and we never see them again. But if we recycle the nutrients and the water into hydroponic systems and biocultures, that's the big steel vats at the bottom left, we can feed huge cities like New York and Shanghai and London and Paris and Moscow, and we can feed them by simply recycling what already flows through that city. And this is really starting to happen. It's starting to take off big time. So you're hearing about sky farms and things like that. That's just the tip of the iceberg of what is coming in a revolution. So cities are going to become major food producers in the future. They will produce probably a third to a half of their own food, and they won't have to drag it from the Amazon and cut down the Amazon and things like that. The other one is deep ocean aquaculture. Now, if you do fish farming close to the coast, chances are you'll pollute wherever you're doing. If you're doing it in a Norwegian field or a Scottish loch, something like that, you end up polluting with chemicals, with toxic chemicals, and with just simply the poo from all the fish that you're raising. That's no good because there's no circulation in those close coastal things. If you farm the deep oceans, all the nutrients are carried away on the current, and there is no need to farm animals as intensively, or fish as intensively, as you do on close to land. So deep ocean aquaculture pulls up its nutrients from maybe a kilometre down in the ocean, uses them to grow seaweeds, ocean plants, uses the ocean plants to feed grazing fishes, uses the grazing fishes to feed carnivorous fishes like snappers and things like that, and cod. So basically, you have a complete sustainable farming system right out where nobody goes, in the deep ocean where there's no traffic, you know, in the middle of the Pacific and things like that. There's almost no marine traffic. You're not getting in anybody's way. You're not causing a pollution problem. We can produce at least a third of the world's food in the deep ocean. And there are people working on the technologies for doing that exactly now, including in the United States. So if we put these three things together, what we can do is create a renewable food supply. That's enough food for every human being every day. Okay, we do not need to use the industrialized methods that we have been using for the last 50 years. We can go away from that towards these much more refined, much less polluting systems. And that's going to really change human health because it's going to give everybody a healthy, fresh diet. So that's going to have a huge effect on people's health. A lot of the problems that you've got at the moment is the fact that most modern diseases, cancer, heart disease, stroke, all of these things are diet related. They're related to this incredibly unhealthy industrial diet that society is being fed on by big food companies who are not interested in the nutritious aspects at all. They're interested only in the money. So once we start creating regenerative agriculture, urban farms and things like that, deep ocean aquaculture, everybody on Earth can have a much healthier diet because you can do this anywhere. You can do this in the middle of Africa. You can do this, you know, in a city like New York, and they are doing it in New York at the moment. You can do it in Gaza, and they were doing it in Gaza, but it probably got bombed. So, you know, basically, the opportunity to have renewable food, you know, is huge, absolutely huge. It's much bigger than the opportunity for renewable energy. So it's going to be a boom industry. Why don't we get with it now and improve the health of the entire planet? So that's basically, you know, the food system. It's going to be a delightful way to go because, do you know, we're currently only eating 1/3 sorry, 300 plants. Humans now eat 300 different plants, and there are 30,000 edible plants on this planet. So we're only eating 1% of the possible edible plants on this planet. And we can produce them in our cities, and we can produce them wherever you like, in the oceans, etc., etc. So, the opportunities are exciting. It's a very creative area, food, and many people are engaged in it. Now, if you do that, basically what you can then do is do what E.O. Wilson, who I had on the slide at the beginning, advised us to do, which is turn half the world back to nature. If you don't need to farm or graze that world because you've got renewable food, then you can just restore the rainforest, restore the grasslands, the prairies. You can put them back and bring back the animals that are now being lost. So we can actually, so if we have renewable food, we can fix the sixth extinction as well. And look, I know farmers and indigenous people all over the world who are doing this right now. Bottom left-hand corner, that's the Tak, the Mongolian horse that Genghis Khan and his crew rode around on. That was reintroduced to Mongolia from France, of all places, believe it or not. So now they're reintroducing animals like that, but they have to look after the landscape. They have to bring back the landscape that those horses once grazed, and so on. So it's all a matter of looking after the world. And the best people to do this are the farmers and indigenous people who are currently being kicked off their land by modern industrial and corporate development. Okay, so these people are being destroyed as we speak. Just like the Irish farmers in the potato famine and the Scotch farmers in the Highland clearances, we're throwing away farmers like there's no tomorrow. We're throwing away human wisdom like there is no tomorrow. We're throwing away a healthy diet like there is no tomorrow. So if we can develop a Stewards of the Earth program where we actually pay these people to restore the environment, then we can actually replenish the earth. We can hand over to our grandchildren a green, healthy planet that produces safe, healthy, renewable food. So that's really the back of this idea. If we produce food in a different way, we can actually replenish the earth, and that's going to make us all a lot healthier. Now, we've talked a lot about chemicals and their impact on human health. Basically, the solution here is similar to the solution to climate change. We need an alliance of consumer organizations, mothers groups, parents groups, things like that around the world who want to clean the place up. Now, I know, I mean, you've got people like the Breast Cancer Foundation in the United States and elsewhere, all trying to say, let's get rid of these things that are causing cancer. So there's lots and lots of organizations working on a cleaner earth, but they're not working together. So we need to build a big global alliance. And part of that, and to bring attention to it, we need to reintroduce a right that every human being for the last 1,000,000 years has had, but which has been confiscated in the last 50 years. And that is a right not to be poisoned. Okay, our great-grandparents and our great-great-grandparents all lived in an environment that wasn't full of industrial and petrochemical poisons. So if we want to not be poisoned, we have to get rid of the petrochemicals and basically, just clean the place up. But first of all, I think we have a right to live in a clean world, because for 1,000,000 years we did live in a clean world. We just made it dirty in the last 50-odd years or so. So we've got to get rid of the toxins in the food chain. Okay, if you look at the environmental ECG group in America, they will tell you that the amount of poisons you get out of strawberries, grapes, a lot of fresh food is horrifying. Basically, a lot of our fresh food and vegetables sold through supermarkets are covered in fungicide. You might recall, if you've ever grown strawberries for yourself, and you'll notice that when you pick them, If you don't eat them straight away, they go moldy within a day or two. The strawberries you buy in the supermarket never go moldy. Well, they don't go moldy for weeks. And the reason is they're saturated in fungicide. And fungicide is one of the deadliest poisons because fungi are really tough critters. So, so everybody is eating that. If they're eating strawberries or they're eating other things that have been heavily sprayed with fungicide, then, and it's very hard to wash this stuff off, let me tell you. So, we need a big effort to clean up these issues and get people back onto healthy, fresh food. So there's a whole lot more detail there. But basically what we need is an IPCC, that's an international intergovernmental panel on climate change that monitors what's happening in the climate. We need one of those for chemicals. Because at the moment, we don't know what's happening, where all these chemicals are going, but they're washing around the earth in air, in water, in food, in wild animals, in human beings. So we need to get a real hard handle on that if we're going to clean it up. And we can clean it up. We've got the technologies to clean it up. We've got the ability to clean it up. I've worked for 20, 30 years with scientists who are trying to clean the place up. And let me tell you, it's doable. It's just that we don't want to do it because it's expensive. It's too expensive to stop killing people. So, let's get on with it again. Let's clean up the world. Now, this is a nice controversial one. Look, if we think about the human population, and I mentioned that we're currently at 8.2, we're going to 10 or 11, and the Earth's carrying capacity is about 2. So we're way overpopulated for what the Earth can carry in the long term. Now, if we don't solve that problem, the result will be a crash, because every other animal that has ever gone through a population spike like humans has suffered a catastrophic crash in its population when the food supply it depended on ran out. And that's the same with us. We're not exempt from this in any way, shape, or form. Voluntarily lowering our population gradually is preferable to catastrophe. Like, catastrophe is really bad. Think Eastern Europe at the end of World War II, when the Russian army went like a plague of locusts through there and took all the food and people just died of starvation. Think about the Stalinist Kulak murders, 11 million people dead in the Ukraine and elsewhere. Think about the big famines in China and India over the last century or so. That's what happens when people run out of food, when their population is too high for their food production capacity. We want to avoid that for humanity if we possibly can. But guess what? You can avoid it easily with family planning. All we need to do is make family planning available to everybody. And you could do that. You could make every family in the world, give them access to family planning and contraception and things like that for half the price of one nuclear submarine. So this is not a very expensive thing at all. It's cheap. It's totally affordable. So countries that are currently overpopulating too fast, which is some of the sub-Saharan African countries and things like that, some countries in Asia and so forth, and they're the people who are sending them their migrants. India, China have started to contract their populations. Well, China has, but India hasn't really yet. They haven't got control of it yet. But that's where the migrants are coming from. There's a third of a billion migrants going around the world at the moment, every year, moving into new countries. And that's why all the ferment and debate is going on in America and Britain and Australia and France and everywhere about foreigners coming and living here. Well, if you want to stop foreigners coming and living here, then what you have to do is help them control their own population voluntarily. I stress, none of this can be done compulsorily. It can be done voluntarily. Just give people the means to do it, and they will do it because they already are. Right? So the idea, we encourage people, have one child less than you otherwise would have had. If you were going to have 2 kids, have 1. If you were going to have 1 kid, have none. And large numbers of young people are telling me today they don't want any kids. A surprising number of young people in their teens, 20s and 30s are saying, we think it's too dangerous a world to bring a child into. So more and more people are moving to that perspective, which is a very interesting thing because humans are actually starting to self-discipline as regards overpopulation. We've spoken about the pandemics. We need a plan. We need a proper plan. I know the World Health Organization has been working on this and they're just about to sign a big treaty on it and things like that. But there's an awful lot that we can do to help that, to stop the next pandemic. And the first thing is let's get the population down, because infectious disease relies on very high numbers of whatever it's infecting. You know, if you run a chicken house and you put too many chickens in it, most of them will die of disease because they're packed in together. If they're running around on in a farm, in a field, they don't get those diseases because they're not packed so closely together. So human overpopulation is a major source of disease. So the best thing we can do to stop pandemics is to have fewer people. Limit travel. I've mentioned this before. I know it's controversial, but as I say, does the right to travel, to have a nice holiday in Europe or somewhere else, Africa, does that trump the right? You know, does that entitle you to kill people by spreading the disease that you carried on that aeroplane? I don't think it does myself, but people have not looked at the moral dimension of travel yet. And I think we need to start asking ourselves, if we want to stop pandemics, you know, then we need to curb travel in some way. If we don't do it, then we just have to accept that more of us are going to die of pandemics. So, you know, the next thing is ending the environmental destruction. I've mentioned that diseases like hantaviruses come out of the ruined Amazon. HIV came out of the ruined Congo. You know, a lot of these diseases come out of, you know, out of wrecked environments where their native host then comes into contact with human beings and passes the virus along. And there've been 90 cases of animal viruses which were never seen in humans before, transferring into humans in the last 50 years. 90 cases. Now, not all of those have ended up as pandemics or even as epidemics. So Marburg virus would be a good example. But they've all got pandemic potential if we keep on spreading them with the social behavior that we've got at the moment. So, you know, this is a problem that can be solved, in fact, quite easily. And we showed with COVID that you can jump on a problem and solve it fairly quickly. But we're not doing enough at the moment to do so. The next thing is all of these out of control technologies I spoke about, AI, universal surveillance, and so on. We basically need a worldwide technology agreement because at the moment, nobody is policing these things. They can be used for good or they can be used for ill. So artificial intelligence is a classic example. You know, it can be used for great, it's a wonderful thing for some applications, but in other cases, it can be used to, as I say, to control nuclear weapons or spy on you or whatever. So you know, we've got to control the bad uses and allow the good uses of these new technologies. But at the moment, allowing the market to do that is a recipe for disaster, basically. The market will never control them. The market will only go wherever it thinks the profit is to be had. It will not stop these things killing people, in other words. So we need a body, a world body, that actually evaluates all new technologies, looks at the upsides, looks at the downsides, and says, okay, let this technology go, subject to these controls or regulations or some sort of restriction. Because at the moment, all these technologies have horrific downsides if they are just allowed to let rip. Now, we mentioned misinformation. Look, I personally, as a journalist, I think misinformation is fixed reasonably easily. And you can do it just by fact checking. fact-checking organizations, there's more than 400 of them worldwide. And they, what they do is when a politician says something outrageous, they look at the facts and then they publish that this politician has exaggerated or lied or misinformed the public in this particular way. So we're doing something that's as old as human society, which is we're exposing the liars and the deceivers to public shame. And public shame, there's no physical penalty, but public shame is a pretty powerful tool if you do that. So I think we need a World Truth Commission to fact check the outrageous claims of politicians, corporate heads, tech bros, whoever you like, billionaires, all people who are saying stupid things at the moment, and telling the public what the truth really is. Because at the moment, these people are getting away with the fact that most people don't know or haven't the resources to check it for themselves. So we need a body that actually polices this, because as I say, if you let it rip, it's going to destroy democracy, it's going to destroy government, it's going to wreck society in many ways. And wouldn't you like to know which websites you can trust and which websites you can't? Well, I think we need an integrity commission as part of this thing, which actually gives them a star rating. You know, so a 5-star website is one where you can trust it. You can trust the information on it. And a 1-star one is not very trustworthy at all. And a no-star one, forget it, mate. You know, it's dangerous. So basically, we need a way of letting people know what the truth is, because without the truth, we humans are in a lot of trouble. Another thing we could really do with is an Earth standard currency. This is to replace all the other national currencies, basically, and it's very easy to do. But this currency is not based on the fantasies of some central bank somewhere about what it's worth. Right? We currently have fiat currencies, which means they are worth whatever the bankers tell us they're worth. And the bankers don't really have a sound way of deciding that. They just throw a dart at a board or something. I don't know what they do. But basically, we need a currency that reflects the value of the planet. And you can easily do that. You could create a currency whose value is based strictly upon the things that support life on Earth: clean air, fresh water, the health of the oceans, the composition of the atmosphere, the state of the world environment. You can create a currency based on those. And if we have such a currency, then if we look after the Earth and it gets better, that value of that currency will increase. If we wreck the planet, the value of that currency will go down. And I believe, so this currency will reflect our good or bad management of the planet Earth. The other thing is, if you create a currency like this, everybody is going to use it for the same reason that everybody in Europe uses the euro to put their savings, because it's reliable. It doesn't go up and down like the speculative other currencies. The other currencies are just decided. Their value is determined by speculators in the money market and by central banks. And they're bouncing around every microsecond of the day. This currency won't do that. So where are you going to put your savings, your life savings? You'd put it into something like this. But so I think we need a world currency that will actually help us to manage the health of the Earth a lot better than we are at the moment. Now, you may have seen this graph before. Basically, Johan Rockstrom, Will Steffen, and others created this idea of the safe planetary boundaries. In that diagram, the green part is safe for humanity, and the yellow and orange slices are where we are way, way over what is safe for us to survive in. So this is a way of looking at our entire Earth system and its health. It's a health report on the Earth system that supports human life. And the idea really is to stay within the green zone if we possibly can. And that's what you would use for an Earth system treaty or any other big plan. to try to preserve a habitable, healthy Earth. Finally, you may say this is terribly difficult because people are so disparate. They speak so many different languages. They live in different countries. They don't talk to one another. Well, by 2030, we are all going to be online, every single one of us. We will be the first generation able to have a worldwide conversation. We'll be able to share our hopes and fears and understanding and ideas and solutions in real time around the planet. We are actually forming an Earth-sized mind. So we're actually starting to think together, not just as individuals, but as a species. This is a very exciting moment in human evolution, when we can think about these problems, take on board this gigantic challenge that I've mentioned, and solve it. The Earth is a lifeboat, sinking under the pressures of overcrowding, dwindling resources, and fearsome demand. We either row it to safety together, or we go down together. The choice is stark, and it is now before us. So if we want a healthy planet and better personal health, the scientific advice can be found here and in many, many other respectable sources. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Julian, for that very informative presentation. So we are now going to begin our Q&A session. Before we begin, you just showed that I guess your one of your books. I believe you have multiple books. Where are they able to get your books?
Amazon is the easy place.
All right. Beautiful, beautiful. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into questions. So you listed a number of 10 major threats. In your opinion, which of these 10 threats currently poses the most immediate danger to human survival?
All of them. Because if you don't fix all of them, we won't survive. Okay, they've all got to be fixed because they're going to do us in. So they are different dimensions of the same problem. As I said, look, it's perfectly obvious that if we had an all-out nuclear war, we'd all be gone in a matter of weeks. It's fairly clear that if we allow business as usual with climate change, most of us are going to be gone by the end of the century. So those are the two most deadly ones. But if a new pandemic starts up like avian flu, that could be just as deadly. We really don't know. If there is a simultaneous collapse in the harvests of some of the major food bowls around the world, think the Chinese food bowl, think the Midwest of America, think Argentina and Australia and things like that. If climate wrecks the food supply there, you will have a very quick collapse of national governments and social order around the world. So it's very hard. You can't predict a thing like that. We can anticipate drought, say in Australia, but we can't say when it's going to happen simultaneously around the world. But it's already, the point is that the climate engine is going faster and faster, and the chances of simultaneous collapses in the food supply is increasing all the time.
Speaking of that, I was just reading about bee collapse, colony collapse for bees in the United States. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I hadn't read too deep into it, but it was saying something like 70 to 100% of the bee population is being extinguished in the United States just in this past year. Is that true? What do we do about it? What's going on?
It's happening worldwide, and it's probably happening for a multiple number of reasons. Okay, so there are diseases in the bee population. The bees are being overworked, by beekeepers. There's a loss of wildflowers and honey flow that they rely on. So there's a bunch of causes. There's viruses in bees and things like that. But yes, bee populations are collapsing. They're collapsing faster in America than they are in Europe, but they're collapsing in Europe too. They're under stress in Australia. They're not collapsing there yet, but this is really serious because 1/3 of the food in your supermarket comes from a plant that is fertilized or pollinated by bees. So bees actually provide 1/3 of the world's food. Think about all those Californian almonds, for example. No bees, no almonds. You know, it's as simple as that. The entire categories of food would just vanish if we run out of pollinators. Now, bees aren't the only pollinator, but they are far and away the hardest working and most efficient pollinator, the European honeybee, I mean, or the Asian honeybee. So the loss of bees is another canary in the coal mine. It's telling us the way we're managing the planet is an unhealthy and dangerous way. So, you know, it's a warning. It's a warning. But if we lose our bees, we lose our stone fruit. No more plums, no more apricots. A lot of vegetables will disappear as well because they need bees to fertilize them. So really, you know, it's a very worrying symptom.
And now you didn't mention pesticides, I don't think. Do they contribute to the collapse of the bee population?
Oh yes, very, very much so. Yeah, there are a lot of pesticides that are sprayed with perfectly good reason by farmers to eliminate things like cotton bollworms and what have you. But many of these pesticides, they're far more toxic now than they used to be 30, 40, 50 years ago. A lot of chemicals used on farm today are 10,000 times more poisonous than DDT. Okay, so they and once they're out there in the environment, heaven knows what they're killing. Um, and so, yeah, around worldwide, we use about 5 million tons of these super toxic pesticides in our food supply. And a lot of them are going through into the food system, which is why you will find pesticide in mother's milk in every country on earth now, because there's just so much of it being used in the food system. And every young child, the minute it's born, is getting a mouthful of this stuff, which I think is just shocking. Um, so it's not just killing bees, it's also affecting human beings. It may be, we've got bigger bodies, it takes a longer time to poison us, but the effect is there. And that's probably maybe one of the things that's damaging our brains. It's very hard to know.
You described a looming world water crisis. What are the primary drivers of this crisis, and what regions are most vulnerable?
Okay, the two regions that are most, well, the Middle East is out of water now. Okay, so and they're going to double their population at the rate they're going. So that the whole of the Middle East, that's North Africa, Arabia, and across into Central Asia, all of those countries have got a water crisis right now. Rich countries are using a desalination to pull fresh water out of the oceans, but you can't grow food with desalination. Okay, you just need too much water to grow food. So the problem is it's urban. The main thing that's destroying the water supply is cities, because cities are dragging all that water from thousands of miles away, so that people can have gardens and showers and wash their cars and all and have industry. Industry consumes an enormous amount of water, manufacturing and so forth. So cities are basically taking the water away from farmers. And a classic example of this is North China, where the main wheat area is the North China Plain. That water, the wheat crop is watered by groundwater. 3/4 of the groundwater is now gone. And the reason it's gone is huge cities like Beijing have arisen and they've sucked it dry. And the farmers can no longer get that water. So the food production is starting to collapse. And the same thing is happening in North India as well. I mean, New Delhi is out of water. We're seeing whole cities like New Delhi in India, Sao Paulo in Brazil, Cape Town in South Africa. There are in California. There are cities that really are on the edge from lack of water. So this is another sign that we're overpopulated. We've just pushed the resources too far. The water crisis is it's a sleeping giant. It really is. 4.5 billion people in the world are actually suffering acute water scarcity at least part of the year. And that means they're suffering from all the other diseases that having bad water or lack of water goes with.
And are any of these cities that are feeling the water crisis, are they doing anything about it? Are they beginning recycling of water and doing water treatment so that way they can keep the water they have in their system, or are they just suffering?
Well, I don't know. I mean, New Delhi is a city of 24 million people, and the Indian High Court actually drew attention to the fact that they'll be out of water within 2 years. So they're either going to have to reduce their population and move people out of New Delhi, or they're going to have to introduce a whole lot of ways to. I mean, you can manage water much better than we do at the moment. And water is probably one of the worst managed resources on the entire planet. We squander it constantly and all the time. And to think that you can just turn on a tap and it'll be there is ridiculous. I mean, it's noticeable to me that in the old days you had as much water coming out of the tap as you like. These days people buy bottled water, reflecting its scarcity, in fact. So bottled water is a reflection of the fact that drinking water is getting a bit tight in various places. Look at what's happening in the Amazon. I mentioned Sao Paulo is a huge city, another huge city. I think about 20 million people, something like that. And they were nearly out of water 2 years ago. One of the reasons is that we're cutting down the Amazon rainforest to feed beef, to make hamburgers for America and elsewhere. And cutting down the Amazon rainforest disrupts the rainfall in that area. It reduces what's known as the small water cycle, which is that 1/3 of all rain is what's generated locally by respiration and transpiration. So if you cut down a forest, what you do is you create a desert because you've reduced the local rain by up to 1/3. So by trying to farm the Amazon, by replacing tropical rainforest with savanna and grazing cattle and growing soybeans, you're actually creating a dust bowl. So what happened in Oklahoma, in the 30s, is what's happening in the Amazon now. But the Amazon is a bloody sight bigger than Oklahoma, and it's going to have a much larger world impact. So the water crisis is brewing. And it's simply that water cannot have two uses. You can't use it to grow food and irrigate a city. So we've got to make our mind up. Do we want to have the city with the large population, or do we want food?
So based on what you just said with regard to beef in the Amazon, would the logical step be to reduce our beef consumption?
Well, yes, probably. I mean, to me, beef is a luxury product, and we're paying supermarket prices for it. So and it really, people should pay for the environmental damage that is caused by producing a particular food. So the price of beef should actually reflect the amount of damage that it costs. I mean, to produce 1 kilo of steak needs 15,000 liters of water. That's all the water that's taken to grow the grass to feed, or the grain to feed the animal. So it gives you some idea how much water you've wasted just to put one steak on your plate. So yeah, I would tend to say I'm not one of those people who say we've got to stop eating meat, because in actual fact, cattle are a very valuable part of the ecosystem. And if you graze them at the right levels, you can in fact restore your grasslands and your prairies and things like that. But if you overgraze, then you will wreck those prairies or grasslands and turn them into deserts. So we can see some of that happening in Africa. It's already happened in the Middle East. I mean, think of your Bible. When Father Abraham came across from Ur of the Chaldees into what is today Israel, it was the Fertile Crescent. There was bush and forest and everything there. But today it's been grazed absolutely flat. That's not beef cattle, it's sheep and goats mainly. But over a few thousand years, 2,000 or 3,000 years, we've eliminated all the vegetation in that part of the world, in the Middle East. And it's a dust bowl as a result. So that kind of process, and what are the consequences of that? Well, the mess that is modern Syria started with a major drought. about 25, 30 years ago. And that was what put an awful lot of farmers off the land. They went into the cities. They made trouble in the cities. They didn't like the regime. The Civil War broke out really because of the displacement of all of these refugees from farmland. So, it's an example of how a small problem can snowball into the collapse of a nation state.
Thank you. So given the scale of topsoil loss and its impact on food security, what urgent actions are needed to reverse this trend?
Well, basically replace farming, modern industrial farming, with renewable food, because every industrial farming method involves disturbing the topsoil. So even if you're a very good conservation farmer and you do trash farming and things like that, you get a heavy shower of rain and you lose tons of soil just off one acre or 1 hectare. They've measured this in Iowa. I think at a heavy storm, it was 12 tons of soil per acre was lost just from rainfall. So you can stop wind erosion, which is what created the Oklahoma Dust Bowl, by the right sort of farming methods, but you can't stop rainfall from ripping off the topsoil. So basically, stop disturbing the topsoil is the short answer. How do you do that? Well, you either have a permanent grazing system, and you keep plants on the soil all the time, holding the soil together, and you don't overgraze. Or else you start, as I say, recycling the nutrients and water in the city and get New York to feed itself. And that's a lot more doable than most people think. And the other thing I should mention, the new livestock are these little tiny plant cells and animal cells that are producing all of these new foods. So people call it synthetic meat and things like that. It's actually animal muscle tissue that has been grown in the laboratory and turned into hamburger or sausages or pies or whatever. It's actually a lot healthier than the stuff that goes moo. And it doesn't cause all that damage with farm chemicals and soil erosion. So urban food production and deep ocean aquaculture are a major solution to this problem. We just stop putting the pressure. Regenerative farmers really minimize the pressure they put on the soil. They're very careful people. And there are great regenerative farmers like Joel Salatin in the United States, and so on, who are doing this constantly, and other farmers are taking it up. But that alone is not going to cut the mustard. That's not going to feed 10 billion people. So we need other ways of feeding them, and just recycling nutrients in cities would do the trick.
Is anyone recycling nutrients currently? Like any of the cities doing this? Is that being done at scale at all?
Yeah, look, the Dutch are pretty good at these sorts of things. As you know, the Dutch, they've got the world's biggest pig industry, or something, the world's biggest pig export industry anyway. So quite surprising things. They recycle all their vegetable waste and compost it locally, or a lot of it. So garden waste, the waste from tulip farms, the waste from crop wastes and things like that. That gets composted, and compost is a form of fertilizer. So, you can do that, but you can take that process further. And there are experiments, I'm aware of at least 5 experiments in the United States where people are taking nutrients either from sewage works or from other sources, abattoirs, and they're turning them back into fertilizers to feed growing plants. And if you feed those plants in a hydroponic system, you lose nothing. If you fertilize a field full of corn, you're going to lose 2/3 of the fertilizer. It'll just wash off, or it'll disappear into the soil, or it'll feed weeds. It won't feed the corn plant. Only a bit of it will feed the corn plant. So the system we use at the moment is terribly inefficient. But if you do it hydroponically, so you grow your plants in a sterile medium, and you put the nutrients in a fluid that goes to the plant roots, then the plants grow, big and healthy, and they get everything they need, and you take the nutrients that are washed out at the end and you put them back in at the top again. So you use everything. You feed the plants only what they need to produce beautiful tomatoes or whatever. And the other thing I need to say about soils is that if you farm a soil for a long time, especially using NPK, that's phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium fertilizers, you eventually strip all of the micronutrients out of the soil. Now, the loss of micronutrients is a major factor in human disease. So, if you haven't got enough iodine, you get goiter. That's a very simple example. So there's a whole lot of human diseases, including infectious diseases, that are driven by the lack of micronutrients in our diet today, because we've been mining our soils for hundreds of years, and those soils are now getting depauperate, and we're not replacing those micronutrients, or not in the quantities that we need. Whereas if you have an urban food system like I've described, you can add those micronutrients in at the top and keep on recycling them forever.
Thank you. I believe the term you used was renewable food. Is that the term that you used earlier?
Yeah,
And
because we've
what
got
is that?
renewable.
What does that look like? What is renewable food? Is there anything out there on the market that you would consider renewable food that we can kind of imagine what it is?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've given examples of hydroponic lettuces and
Okay,
hydroponic
that's what
tomatoes
you mean.
like that. As long as you're recycling, as long as your nutrient source, you're not mining. If you're mining, it's not renewable. You're digging a hole in the ground and transferring the nutrients into the farming system. But if you're reusing nutrients that are already, so you're using all the food waste produced by New York and all the sewage produced by New York, and what you're doing is you're taking the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the potash and the molybdenum and the selenium and all the micronutrients out of it, and then compounding them into a fertilizer to feed more hydroponic or aquaponic crops, then that's a way of recycling these things. And the human consumer has got the benefit of always having enough selenium in their diet, for example.
Thank you. Considering the urgency of the situation, what are the most immediate impactful actions that individuals, communities, and governments should prioritize? I mean, we can break that down. How about individuals? Why don't we start with that?
In my book, I list hundreds of things that you can do in your own life. I mean, stop using fossil fuels as much as possible. Most of the people I know are traveling much less. They're either going to electric vehicles or to other other forms of transport. Um, they're growing their own veggies. They're doing all these sorts of things. They look for clothing that is less damaging to the environment. So instead of dressing yourself in petroleum, you dress yourself with organic cotton or something like that. So a lot of people are making small changes, but with 8 billion people, every small change counts. And what we've got to bear in mind is that we, the rich Western world, are the minority. That people living in India and Africa are living pretty sustainably already, only except for the numbers of them. So the actual lifestyle, the food they eat and the way they recycle things, is quite sustainable. And it's really just a case of changing our mindset. At the moment, we've got this throwaway mindset: buy it at the supermarket, use it. If we don't like it, just chuck it away. And we're chucking away 40% of the world's food, which is gross. Now that is a total insult to the planet. So 40% of the farmland in the United States is feeding nobody, right? Because of the scale of food waste inherent in this industrial system that we've got. So whereas if you were growing, vegetables, say, locally in your suburb in New York, you could actually go and see them being grown. You could have a salad that was harvested 5 minutes ago. There are hospitals in the US that are growing fresh vegetables on the roof to give to patients in recovery from surgery to help them heal. So by giving them a fresh diet full of vitamins and, all the right goodies. So, there's a lot of this stuff happening around the world now. Intensive urban food production. I don't call it farming, it's food production. And as I say, I think that the cultures, the biocultures, is going to add a whole new dimension within the next 10 years. I mean, you don't know what's in a sausage, do you? You don't know, you don't know what's in a hamburger. You won't know if the meat in your hamburger is produced in a steel vat or on four legs in an animal that went moo. But let me make the point that producing meat in a steel vat is actually uses 98% less land than producing it on a farm. So, you really don't need a lot of land to produce a huge amount of food.
So, corporations in the United States, and as far as I can tell, pretty much everywhere else in the world, have a disproportionate amount of power with regard to what they do themselves and their impact on what governments do, and then subsequently what populations do. How do we get corporations who are making decisions for their bottom line to be convinced that this is in the interest of the bottom line and to actually participate in this? Because it seems like they're making decisions that are not necessarily concerning their own personal interests as human beings, right? So how do we get buy-in from these people?
Well, a corporation is set up with the sole purpose of making a profit. And it doesn't really matter whether it's producing cars or food or clothing or whatever, or software, but it's there to make money. And very often, what it produces and the quality of what it produces becomes subordinate to the fiscal imperative to screw more money, dollars, and to make a huge profit. Now, there's only one thing that corporations are afraid of, and you are seeing it right now in the United States. They are terrified of consumers turning against them. Okay, they're not frightened of governments. They don't give a fig about regulation and things like that. Because if you over-regulate a corporation in America, it'll just go to China or somewhere else. And that's what's happened with the chemical industry, by the way. The only thing that they're afraid of is you and me and us saying, well, we're not going to buy Teslas. And there's this huge boycott that we're witnessing around the world on one car brand that's the stuff that corporate nightmares are made of. And with social media, it can happen very fast. And it's happened many times in history. There've been a lot of instances of consumer boycotts, disciplining companies, and just ordinary consumer pressure. I mean, I don't know about eggs in America, but in Australia, 15 years ago, all our eggs were from battery chickens. Nowadays, none of them are. They're either produced from shed chickens or free-range chickens. And that's just consumer pressure has ended that particular cruelty. There was no financial reason to do it. People just said that it's cruel to keep bloody 6 chickens in a tiny little cage, not much bigger than a shoebox. And we won't eat your product unless you change your ways. So the egg industry, after much grumbling, changed. They're producing eggs. I know you've got expensive eggs at the moment, but that's not for this reason. But we've got cheap eggs, and they're produced on farms. We buy chickens protected by big sheepdogs, so it's corporations can change. They don't like changing. They whinge about it. It's very inconvenient. You have to retool or do something like that. Look at the change that's gone on with electric cars. I mean, corporations fought tooth and nail for 100 years for the right to have an internal combustion engine, and they killed every other engine that was ever invented in the process. But then the electric car started to make sense and have a good battery, and suddenly consumers said, we want to go with this. You know, we're sick of these smelly, polluting old things. So I know not everybody has got it. Some people love their revs, but it's going, you know, so that revolution is coming, and the corporations, so big, stodgy corporations like the major American car manufacturers are now all switching to electric because they've seen which way the consumer wind was blowing. So we can discipline corporations worldwide to produce products that don't damage the earth, that do restore the topsoil, that do protect nature, and in particular, that protect our health. And we have got to start boycotting products that damage our health. That's a really serious thing. Now, especially the products that damage the brains of our growing children, because that's an outrage that children should grow up with less intelligence than nature already endowed them with.
And those products are what?
Well, products that are free from neurotoxins, which are nerve poisons.
No, I mean, which are the ones that are that we should avoid that have the neurotoxins in it?
Well, a lot of them, anything that's got plastic has got neuro,
Right.
right?
Yes.
If it's in plastic, don't bloody buy it. Don't buy water in a plastic bottle. You know, you're exposing yourself. You don't know. We don't know which neuro. It's like cigarette smoking. The 7,000 chemicals in cigarette smoke. We don't actually know which ones cause cancer. We know some of them, but we don't know. But we do know that cigarettes cause cancer. So it's a very similar issue. There's this great mass of nerve poisons, which, you know, for example, you've heard of forever chemicals.
Yes.
I mean, these are things like, you know, they use in your sofa to stop it catching fire, flame retardants. Basically, a lot of those are nerve poisons. A lot of the breakdown plastics, the microparticles, are either nerve poisons or else they are vectors for nerve poisons. In other words, they carry the nerve poison into your bloodstream, and it then attacks your spine and brain. So, you know, there's some very good work done at Harvard Medical School and New York University and places like that into what chemicals we really should be avoiding. So I could give you a list, and it's 1,500 chemicals long, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And you would not know the names of most of these chemicals. They'd be foreign to you. But we can push people to have manufacturing processes that exclude these things.
So you talked about fact checking. Who would fact check the fact checkers? Because there's so many different contradictory fact checkers out there. Obviously, there are political organizations that create fact checkers. There are lobbying groups and businesses that fund fact checkers. So, you know, I think it's either in 1984 or in, it sounds very Orwellian, but I think it was in Harry Potter, the Ministry of Truth, right? Where for political purposes, they had a Ministry of Truth and they determined what the official truth was. How do we ensure that, some sort of global fact checker wouldn't have some sort of motivation to have certain facts be true when perhaps they're not?
Well, the best system that humans have ever invented for doing this is what they use in science. It's called peer review. And that is when you make a scientific discovery, it then gets shown to 30 or 40 other scientists, some of whom may hate you personally. And they all go through it with a fine-tooth comb and criticize your finding and your methodology and your conclusions and things like that. And they have at you and they rip your finding apart. They try to prove you wrong. And when they can't prove you wrong, you basically say, well, that gravity must exist because the conclusion is the evidence is there for gravity. So what peer review does is it subjects any particular statement or claim to unwavering scrutiny from a whole lot of people, many of whom are completely disinterested in what you're doing. So it's independent in a lot of ways. Now, if you established a World Truth Commission, I personally would subject it to fact checking itself by various, mainly university groups, people who've got the wherewithal to do this. I wouldn't use governments, because governments are all tainted by politics and they're all out after their own selfish interests. But I do think that universities still adhere, and science broadly still adheres to the principle of let's tell the truth the way we see it, the way we understand it, the way the evidence. So it comes down, it's the same principle you use in a court of law. When you sentence somebody in a court of law, you don't actually know whether they're guilty or not, but the weight of evidence has persuaded a jury that they are guilty. And most of the time, they get it right. Not all the time. So again, it's a jury system. So that's how I would apply a sort of a jury system to a global truth commission.
I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. John Abramson's work. He is a Harvard Medical School professor, and he's also been a speaker, and it will be a speaker this year at the conference. And he talks about specifically peer-reviewed journals and how the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry have basically taken control over them. And two things. One, they've taken control of them because they fund like 60% of the peer-reviewed journals. But also, even in the peer review, they don't have access. The peer reviewers don't have access to the raw data. They only have access to the research model and the conclusions of the researchers. So they don't actually have access to all the information that you would think they do. How do we ensure that we have a peer review system that just because that it really does become scary when you have some global entity deciding what we can talk about as truth and what, you can be telling the truth, but if they give you a 1 rating on your veracity and, out of 5, now no one listens to you. How do we ensure that?
Well, I mean, I'm a very strong critic of scientific peer review that has been polluted by money. And I mean, money will corrupt anybody, a lot of science has been corrupted by money. And the reason we have a toxicity problem worldwide is because the petrochemical industry that has made so much money out of manufacturing plastics and pharmaceuticals and all of these products, which have not been properly checked for human safety or environmental safety, simply because it's too expensive to do that checking. So that's a pretty good example. Chemistry is a pretty good example of an industry that is badly policed from a point of view of truthful integrity, and is pretty much in the hands of the money people. As I say, that there are no perfect systems. All you can really do is say, we've got the best people we can find in the world, have a look at this, and they have concluded that what was said by the British Prime Minister is a load of cobblers, complete nonsense. That's all I'm really advocating. We in Australia have a government owned national broadcaster, and they're at arm's length from the government, and they're theoretically independent, certainly independent of government policy. And they had a fact-checking agency. And so, you could pretty much trust what they were doing. And when you have a fact-checking agency, you have to audit it. You can't just let it rip off on its own. And as I say, I think an example of what can be done is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is basically consists of the best climate scientists from all over, hundreds of them, thousands of them from all over the world. And they're putting their best brains together to try and work out what the hell is going on with our climate and our weather. And, it's not perfect, and they're going to get it wrong. And they have got it wrong because the climate's going much worse than they anticipated. But, nevertheless, it's better than the other thing, which is just sitting here waiting for something awful to happen and not knowing about it.
But in light of the evidence of, okay, so changing that subject. So thank you for that. In light of the evidence of mass harm to the planet, what ethical responsibilities do individuals and corporations, which we've discussed, bear on that?
Well, individuals are, as I said, the only people who can police corporations. So if we want corporations to behave themselves, we have to encourage them to produce ethical, safe, healthy products. And we have to punish them if they stop doing that. So if we think that the actions of this corporation are unethical, then that should be reflected in the shareholding that we dispense with, or the product buying, but we can also protest, and we can also criticize, and we can hire scientists and so on to look into what the problems are. There's a lot that individuals can actually do. As to ourselves, look, just the difference between men and women is that men like to fix a problem quickly with chemistry or weapons or machines or something like that, and they don't care about what the consequences are. Women think about the kids and the grandkids. That's the main difference. Women don't start wars because they know that wars are bloody stupid. It's men who start. Male governments have been the main war starters for the whole of human history. So we need more of that female thinking in the world, which is thinking about the grandkids. What sort of a world are they going to get? Is it going to be a healthy world, or is it just going to be chock full of toxins and nuclear waste and God knows what? If you asked most mothers and grandmothers what sort of a world they wanted, that's the kind of ethos. The answer they would give you is the kind of ethos that we should all be aspiring to. I mean, I believe that if women are not the leaders of the world in every respect, in corporate leaders, political leaders, religious leaders, social leaders, I think humanity is on a hiding to nothing. We're going down the tubes. If we leave men in charge, we're going to wreck the place. But women think long term in a way that men don't. And so I think we should think more like women and less like men.
So Glenn Greenwald on this topic just did a piece on how in Europe the women leaders are the most hawkish and the most aggressive and warmongering in Europe. You can check it out. He just posted it the other day. So when you analyze these leaders out of Europe, you're seeing the exact opposite. And so I don't I don't know if and Margaret Thatcher I don't think was a peacekeeper.
She was. That war was not started by Margaret Thatcher. It was started by the Argentinian junta. They were the ones that invaded the Falkland Islands. So that's a huge misconception. She was defending British citizens who were being attacked by the Argentinians. So, and can you name a decent sized war in the whole of human history that was started by a woman?
I guess, can you name a woman who was in charge at the time where the decent sized war was
I
waging?
can only think of one, and that's
Okay.
Boadicea, who got raped by the Romans, and her daughters got raped, and she got angry, and she brought the Iceni out in rebellion against the Romans and took out an awful lot of Romans. But it's very rare, and I'm not saying women don't make good warriors. They bloody well do. When women are perfectly capable of leading in war. So Margaret Thatcher wasn't the only one. Golda Meir, Indira Gandhi. I can think of several women leaders, Maria Theresa in Austria, Catherine the Great in Russia. They have led their countries in war, but they did not start the wars. Okay, they know that there is really nothing much to be gained from starting a war. Women know that. There's much more to be gained from peace and giving people a good diet and raising children well and so on. And to be honest with you, the female perspective is what is going to save humanity, not the male perspective. Now, males are very short term in their thinking. And just referring to you, I would say that guy's article is just his opinion, because the women of Scandinavia in particular, they've been Vikings in the past. They've given you a head full of war axe and things like that. But the current leaders are, peace is number one with them. And if you talk about Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the EC and things like that, she's not out to make war on Russia, but she is prepared to defend Europe against Russia. So, you know, she's doing what a mother bear does with her cubs. She's prepared to protect her cubs, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I'm just saying that women don't see any percentage in starting wars. On the whole, you know, a few will, but as a rule, most women don't start wars, and as a rule, most wars are started by men. So you know, if we're in this very delicate state in the world, you know, where things could go to hell in a handcart very quickly, then we'd be better off with the peace-loving women in charge than the war-loving men.
Thank you. So recognizing the success of voluntary family planning in reducing birth rates, what further steps can be taken to support this globally? And first, can you define family planning? What actions is family planning? Does this mean saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't have as many kids, or what is family planning?
Well, it depends on your society. If you don't know where babies come from and you think they're given to you by the gods or something, then you might need a big educational program on the human reproductive biology. Most kids in Western society get that in high school, or they get it from their parents or something like that. So you teach people about human reproduction, and you teach people how to prevent human reproduction. And there's a whole host of medical methods that you can use to stop babies. So it is making those available. So whether it's an IUD or a condom or a pill, or you know, a male contraceptive, or it's what's the thing where they chop your bloody tubes, you know, in the males and things like that.
Oh, a vasectomy.
A vasectomy, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you offer people the choice. You don't say you got to do this, you know. You don't even give them a transistor radio like they used to in India if you if you had a vasectomy. But you explain to them, and they understand that children are expensive, right? Every child you get now needs shoes and clothes, and you know, goes to school. It's very expensive. They can't afford to have 13 or 14 children like my great grandparents did. They just can't afford it. So,
Oh,
you know, 1, 2, or 3 children is becoming the norm in almost every society. So it's education. Education of women is number one. It's provision of the medical services that lead to safe contraception. It's providing the medical services that allow the babies that are born to survive. So you've got to get the infant mortality rate down from whatever is causing it, dirty water or you know, infectious disease or whatever. You know, you need your vaccines and things like that. Vaccines have been a huge boost in a way to reducing the birth rate, because babies just weren't dying at the rates that they died when they weren't vaccinated. So, you know, our infant death rates now are 1/10 of what they were 100 years ago. So, you know, all of these things come together. But the education of women worldwide, so they have the courage to make these decisions for themselves if their men don't have the courage, and that's very often the case. That's important, but it's also important to try to educate the men as well.
all right. We just have 1 minute. I'm just gonna let Hassan ask a question real quickly. Hassan, you've been waiting patiently. We just have one quick minute, so go ahead and ask your question quickly.
Yes, sir. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Cribb, thank you very much. We appreciate every minute of it. I just came a little late. At that time, I didn't listen about the world currency. I think that world currency is a very nice idea, good idea, except that we all have to be one state in the world. Otherwise, everything is crushes one country to another. You know, it doesn't seem to me it's not likely that can happen.
Well, it can happen because people are inventing currencies all the time. You know, you've got all these scammy little currencies that people keep inventing on the internet. But the currency that I'm advocating is based upon the ability of the earth to support life. In other words, you measure the composition of the atmosphere, the health of the oceans, the state of the forests, the state of the fresh water, all the things that keep humans alive and happy and well fed. That's what you measure, and your currency value is based on that. It's not based on the fiat, the declaration of central bankers, or the jigging around of a whole lot of irresponsible speculators on the money markets.
And with that, we wrap up our presentation, our Q&A. Thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us, Julian. Really appreciate all the thought that you put into it. Just want to, John, if you can unmute the audience so they can say thank you.
Your care doctor, if you have one, and then the insurance company will have this assessment.
Thank you.
You need to make any